We're closing out our 10 most important players to the future of the Buffalo Bills series with my personal ballot and general thoughts on the project today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, the last 2 days on this podcast has been us working through the consensus top 10 most important players to the future of the Buffalo Bills. On Tuesday, we had the panel come through and we debuted who the list was. And then yesterday it was this follow-up opportunity for me to ask some questions to the panel about unique things about their ballot and general thoughts on the project. Today is my day. Today's my opportunity to share my personal ballot, to share my thoughts on the project, my biggest takeaways. And so I hope that you are excited to hear that, but also put all of this to rest after today. This is a really fun series that we do every single year. The feedback has been incredible. The panel was awesome once again. And so this will be a staple of our calendar every May. And glad that we did it once again. It's very thought-provoking. I hope that at some point throughout this entire conversation, you've taken the time to consider how you would stack up the top 10 most important players to the future of the Bills. And you can see that it's challenging, it's thought-provoking, and in a lot of different ways, it's enlightening because you could really gain some perspective on what this team has. And I'll be honest with you, when I started doing this year, I got it down to 15, and then I got it down to 12, and it was really hard to go from 12 to 10. And so let's start with giving you my actual ballot, and then we'll continue the conversation from there. So my number one player was Josh Allen. There's not a whole lot to say here. He's the franchise quarterback. He's one of the faces of the entire NFL. He's one of the best players in the entire NFL. As Josh goes, so does the Bills, right? I mean, he's that dude. And I mean, he's that important, right? It's not, to me, it's cut and dry. There's nothing really interesting to say here. He's clearly the number one choice. Now it gets a little more interesting. And number two, I do have Stefon Diggs. What he's been able to do with Josh Allen in his first 3 seasons with the team has been remarkable. We've never seen this type of production ever in the history of the team when it comes to a wide receiver. He's really been hand in hand there with Josh and Josh's ascension to being one of the elite players in the entire NFL. I dread the idea that Stefon Diggs isn't available for this football team, right? If he were to have some type of injury and wasn't able to play, that concerns me a ton, right? You can really rely on him. He's been available. He's been productive at all levels of the field. He's a do-everything, legit number one receiver, one of the best in the league. And I think his ability to produce for years to come is not something I have many questions about. I think he can be this type of player for several more seasons. And when I think about this, generally, it's a 3-year sample size. And so the future in the NFL is somewhat short, right? And so when I was really stacking these players, I thought about a 3-year window starting with this season. And I think Steph Diggs is going to be everything that he was the previous 3 seasons over the next 3 seasons. And if that's the case, his presence and his impact is quite valuable. At number 3, maybe this is a surprise to some of you, but I had Von Miller at number 3. I know that he's 34 years old. I know that he tore his ACL last year. But we saw what he meant to this defense in 2022 when he was available. And then when he wasn't available, we also saw what that impact looked like. Von Miller, in the 11 games that he played for the Bills, was everything Brandon Beane signed him to be. Key pressures in critical moments, was monumental against Kansas City. I mean, he was that dude. He was that game changer. He was the closer. And my goodness, do I hate that we couldn't see his impact the rest of the way, especially in the playoffs. And he's a little bit out of sight, out of mind right now, but not for me. I'm very excited for him to get back. I'm very excited for him to get back and making the type of impact that he was before he got injured. And he needs to. The Bills are tied to Von Miller for at least 2 more seasons, maybe longer. And the reality here is that him being that player that Brandon Beane signed him to be for the duration of his time on the Bills is critical. He's the game-changing defensive player for this football team. And his impact, his value, his presence is incredibly valuable. And so Von Miller, for me, I had to put him at number 3. And even with what the Bills did this offseason with the restructure of his contract, it further ties him to the team. So yeah, he's 34, but he's going to be around for probably at least 2 or 3 more seasons. And so I didn't discount Von Miller because of his age. He needs to get back on the field for this football team and get back to making the impact that we saw when he was healthy. And number 4 for me is Tre'Davious White. Tre'Davious White's one heck of a football player, folks. And I know it's been a little bit of time before we've seen vintage Trey White. Tore his ACL Thanksgiving 2022. Missed a bunch of time, came back and found his footing a little bit along the way last year, but he wasn't necessarily fully back to being the Trey White that we remember. But when Trey White's healthy, he's one of the best defensive playmakers in the league. And that dude has the ability to take away the football. Key takeaways in critical moments. That's really been what Trey White's delivered since he's been a member of the football team, is critical takeaways in critical moments. And him getting back to that is huge. Really huge, especially now that Tremaine Edmonds isn't part of the mix and you're going to rely a little bit more probably on your corners and how you space the field on defense. Trey White has proven to us that he's an elite NFL corner, and him getting back to that is absolutely critical for the future of this football team. And so he's handsomely paid. We know what he's capable of, and him getting back to that is huge. And number 5 for me was Deion Dawkins, the Bills' left tackle. You know, Deion Dawkins has quietly just become an absolute stalwart at the position. He's entering his 7th season as the Bills' starting left tackle. He's been a Pro Bowler each of the last 2 seasons. He signed for a couple more seasons. I think surely he'll be a guy that gets a 3rd contract with the team. A lot of personality, a lot of impact. A player that I feel really comfortable as Josh Allen's blindside protector. And one thing about Deion Dawkins is that he hasn't had much stability next to him at right guard. I mean, I'm not sure the Bills have had the same primary player year over year yet next to him. And that puts a lot more on his plate, right? And so obviously a critical position, left tackle. The Bills have a highly paid player that's been productive, that's been reliable, and that's going to be on this team for several years to come. And I think he's continuing to perform at a pretty high level at the position. And so rounding out my top 5 is Deion Dawkins. So at number 1, I had Josh Allen, and the panel had him at number 1. At number 2, I had Stefon Diggs, which is exactly where the panel consensus average together have him. At number 3, I had Von Miller. The panel had him at 6. At number 4, I had Trey White. The panel had him at number 7. And at number 5, I had Deion Dawkins, and the panel had him at number 4. All right, so we have the back half of my ballot to get to and a bunch of different thoughts that I have about the project coming up in just a moment. But first, I do need to tell you about Built Bar, and I just actually ate one before the recording of this podcast. I had the Animal Cookie Bar. It's one of the limited release flavors. They actually just announced a red velvet cake puff, and I went ahead and ordered 3 boxes of those. So look, check them out. These are the best tasting protein bars on the planet. They're healthy and they're delicious. They come in great flavors like red velvet cake and animal cookie and peanut butter puff and brownie batter. So many great flavors. They're all delicious. It's like eating a candy bar, but they're good for you. They're low calorie, they're low sugar, they're high in protein. In fact, this bar right here, 17 grams of protein, 140 calories, 5 grams of sugar. You can't beat that, and it tastes so good. So check them out. Head on over to built.com. Use our promo code LOCKEDON15. That's what I did. I use it just like I want you to use it. LOCKEDON15. That'll get you 15% off your next order. You can also pick up a box off the shelf at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. Folks, try them out. You'll thank us later. All right, so I want to work through the rest of my ballot, but first, I would also like to share with you something new that I'm making available for the listeners of this podcast, and that is our subtext community. I'd like to invite you to join the Locked On Bills subtext community. It's something new that we're offering, and there's going to be a link to join the subtext community in the show notes for today, so you can click that link and sign up for the subtext community. Here's what you get. Well, you get the opportunity to text with me so we can have one-on-one text conversations about the Buffalo Bills. You want to continue the conversations that we're having on this podcast. You want to ask questions, whatever you want. I'm available for you with one-on-one text message conversations. I will also make sure that if you have a herd mentality question, it is a priority for the show. So if you have herd mentality items, you can, of course, email them or DM them to me on Twitter. But also, if you're part of the subtext community, send it to me through that. It'll be a priority for me to get you on the show. We'll have some exclusive content for you. I'll give you some very regular Bills musings texts, right? As I have random thoughts about the team, I'll send out mass messages to everybody. I'll give you my first reaction to all major Bills news. So if they make a move, something like that, I'm going to give you my first reaction through the subtext, and we're going to have some giveaways and other things just like that. So check out the subtext community. There's a link to join in today's show notes. And I mentioned giveaways, so let's do a giveaway. How about that? So how about this? Everyone that joins or has joined, it's been live for a few weeks now, and I have a few dozen people that have already joined. So if you've already joined, great, you're already entered. But if you join now, over the next week, so before May 25th, we'll enter you into a drawing. Everyone that joins the subtext community will be entered into this drawing, and what you'll win is I'll give away a couple copies of my book, or one of my books here, Go Bills. I'll give you a personalized free copy of the book, send it right to your house. 2 people will win that. So join the subtext community, sign up, a lot of perks. We're doing a giveaway, should be fun, and a great opportunity for us to continue this conversation. I love engaging with you guys, and this is a very easy way for us to do that through text messaging. So again, a link in the show notes for today's episode. All right, so let's get back to the ballot here. This is where it kind of gets fun, where you got to get to the nitty-gritty, the back 5. So for me, at number 6, I had Matt Milano. The panel had him at number 3, which was one of the big surprises from the entire project, is that Matt Milano went from not ranked all the way to number 3. And obviously, with Tremaine Edmunds being gone, I mean, Matt Milano has been a really good player for the Bills and a really reliable starter, had an all-pro season last year, but now he's that guy on the second level where he's the vet, right? He's the player that's been around, and he's going to be playing next to somebody that really hasn't, to be honest with you. And so what he does as a matchup player is huge. If you guys remember, I can't stop thinking back to this, is the conversation the year that Matt Milano was kind of banged up, missed a lot of time, and then all of a sudden the Bills couldn't cover tight ends, and they were giving up all this production to tight ends, and then everything before that and everything after that, the Bills really haven't struggled guarding tight ends. Well, that's about Matt Milano. That's the matchup upside that he brings. And obviously, his ability to shoot gaps and play downhill and play in space is really special. We wish he didn't miss so many tackles, but I think that's some of the give and take that comes with Matt Milano. Obviously an impact player. And, he's increasingly now important for this football team with him having a new running mate at middle linebacker. So number 6 for me, number 3 for the panel. At number 7 for me is Gregory Rousseau. The panel had him at number 5. And he's the type of defensive lineman that you look at right now, right? There's Von Miller, and then, okay, who's the other defensive lineman that the Bills have that you feel like can really be an impact playmaking defensive lineman? And you quickly get to Greg Rousseau. He's the guy that can really be a game wrecker. Obviously, the run defense is outstanding. Love the growth as a pass rusher. from year 1 to year 2. He's still really young. I got it written down right here. I got to check. Was he 23? Greg Rousseau is 23 years old. He's got 2 seasons under his belt. Dalton Kincaid right now is 23 years old and has never played in the NFL. Rousseau has 2 seasons under his belt. I'm really excited about the upside here and him to take another step and be an impact playmaker for this football team. And him doing that would mean a lot for the defense. So I have him at number 7. The panel had him at number 5. At number 8, I have Kyer Elam, the Bills' cornerback, second-year player. The panel had him at number 10. And I was glad that Kyer Elam made this list because we saw in spots his ability to really make an impact. I mean, the playoff game against Miami, absolutely critical plays, 1 interception, some key tackles. And I feel like he's a guy that is playing or is going to play a lot more free and a lot more loose next year. And this past season, I thought he was a little rigid, not necessarily with the way he played, but just the mindset, like really kind of overthought things. And if he can slow down, be a little bit more reactionary, not thinking so much, I think he can really be an impact player. The ball skills are really, really good. The athleticism is really, really good. And he can pair with Trey White and give this team a really, really exciting pair of cornerbacks, which is going to be important with what Miami offers in the passing game. And, of course, Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson and those guys now with the New York Jets. And, of course, Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence and all these other friggin' good quarterbacks in the AFC. You better have some corners. And Kyer Elam and Trey White can give you a really formidable pair. And obviously there's a lot of upside with Kyer Elam, who's a young player, only 22 years old. A lot of talent there to unlock. At number 9, I had Dalton Kincaid. The panel had him at number 8, Bills' first-round pick. And I've been pretty adamant about what I expect from Dalton Kincaid, and that's for him to be the number 2 option in this Buffalo Bills passing offense. And that's pretty doggone valuable, pretty important. And so I had to make sure I had a spot for Kincaid, who I think is going to be your new go-to answer in the slot, right? I mean, the Bills can get very creative with him, with their 11.5 personnel packages, if you will. But him being that slot player, the guy that can separate quickly, guy that can work the middle of the field, is going to be huge for Josh Allen in so many ways, whether it's third downs, keeping the offense on schedule, the red zone. I'm going to stop short of calling him Cole Beasley in a tight end Zavadi, but I think he can, if you can imagine that and think about that type of impact, I think he can do it. Really, really polished receiving prospect with his route running, his hands, his body control, and his ball skills. And so sign me up for Dalton Kincaid and the impact that I think he's going to have on this football team. Again, I had him at number 9, and the panel had him at number 8. And so the last player that I had ranked is a player that didn't make the consensus top 10. And again, it was 11 ballots averaged together, and that's how we got the top 10. So this is a player that I voted for in my top 10 that didn't make it, and that's Dawson Knox. I had him at number 10. And then when you average everyone together, he finished at number 13 for the panel. And so the panel had Spencer Brown at number 9. That was the player that got in that I didn't have a vote for, which we'll talk about a little bit more here in just a moment. But yeah, I think we have to still remember Dawson Knox and the fact that he's entering year 1 of a 4-year contract that pays him an average annual salary of $14 million a season. And so the Bills need to still get a lot of value and production out of Dawson Knox. You know, I think that Dalton Kincaid's going to be the 100 target a year guy, but there still should be about 70 targets there for Dawson Knox. And what he can do as a blocker to free up Dalton Kincaid, what he can do as a seam threat, as a really complete tight end in terms of what he can do as a blocker and a receiver. And he's handsomely paid. He's going to be around, and he needs to have an impact on this football team. And I think leaning into this 12 personnel heavy offense, 2 tight ends, what you can do with that. Dawson Knox is still a centerpiece for this football team, despite Dalton Kincaid's presence and despite, him being a first-round pick that we have high expectations for. And so Dawson Knox and his presence and ability to make an impact is not lost on me. And I wanted to have him at number 10. And it was hard. It was hard to leave off some players, and I'll get to that in the next segment. But I felt like that contract, his age, it was too important for me to not include him. And I just feel like his presence really unlocks what they want to do with Dalton Kincaid. And the offense is better when Dawson Knox is involved. And this dude's made some big plays for this football team. Like that game-winning touchdown catch against Kansas City last year, that's a big deal, man. This guy's made some big-time plays. And hopefully he does for a long time, because I think he's very important to the future of this team. All right, so that's my ballot. Went through the whole thing. In the next segment here, in our closing segment, I want to give you some of my random thoughts about the project, the players that were hardest for me to leave off, my biggest surprises, some general thoughts. All that's coming your way after a very quick break. All right, let's get back to it here. I want to start the continuation of this conversation by telling you the two players that were hardest for me to leave off. Like I mentioned earlier, I got it down to 15, and then I got it down to 12, and then it got really hard to get it down to 10. And the two players that were hardest for me to leave off was, first of all, Taron Johnson. You know, Taron Johnson has been such a consistent player for this team as the starting slot corner. He's an every down player. It's not like he's a sub-package defensive player. This is a starter. This is a critical piece to how they want to play defense. I mean, he's playing man coverage in the slot. He's playing zone. He's defending the run. He's got run-fit responsibilities. That's pretty uncommon for corners. I mean, in a lot of ways, he's a linebacker and a corner for this football team. And, you know, he's really important to the way that this team wants to play defense. And he's been a really impactful player. I mean, you can't think of Taron Johnson without remembering some of the biggest moments over the last couple of years, whether it was the pick six against the Ravens in the playoffs, whether it was the game-winning interception against Kansas City in Kansas City last year. This guy's been a really good football player that means a lot to the operation overall. The other player that was the hardest for me to leave off was Spencer Brown at right tackle. And we'll talk a little bit more about him through a different lens in just a moment. But I'm a believer in the upside. I've really pounded the table for the physical traits that he offers. I've talked a lot about his story and maybe why he's been inconsistent to this point. But there's a lot of ceiling there. And him realizing that ceiling, like I've mentioned many times, is as important of a dynamic as anything you could point to for the Buffalo Bills in 2023. If Spencer Brown becomes what I think he can become, there's few things that would matter more to this team. And so he was hard for me to leave off. And as an entire panel, we didn't leave him off. He made it. He made the list. And so those are my two hardest to leave off, Taron Johnson and Spencer Brown. My biggest surprises in reflecting on this project, well, first of all, is not a single player, not a single person, 11 people who are intimately equated with the Buffalo Bills. None of us voted for Taron Johnson. So I had him at number 11, so I'm guilty here too. But I thought somebody would vote for this guy, and nobody did. I thought Anthony Prohaska would have voted for him, maybe Bruce Nolan. Nobody. Not a single vote. It's tough. Do the project for yourself. It's hard. But he's certainly worthy of really knocking on the door, and nobody voted for him. The other biggest surprise that I have is that not a single person voted for Gabriel Davis. Gabriel Davis, when we did this project last year, was number 7. And he was productive this past year. I mean, I know that I've went in on my concerns with Gabe and some of the limitations, but I think Gabe, if the Bills will really embrace him as the number 3 option in this passing game and really utilize Kincaid like I think they should, I think Gabe Davis can get back to doing the things that I really appreciate about Gabe Davis and not being a 100 target a year player for this offense. But I mean, in all likelihood, he's going to have the second most targets this year, and nobody voted for him. So consider me a little bit surprised by that. I'm surprised that Ed Oliver only got one vote. He was in the top 10 of only one person's ballot. He wasn't in mine, so I can't be critical, but it's something that surprises me. Entering a contract year could be a situation where we see a lot of production. I think a lot about Daron Payne with the Washington Commanders, and you look at his career, and he was a good player, but the sack production was just like okay. And then it's a contract year for him. He goes out and has 11 and a half sacks, and now he's paid like almost 20, or is he a little over $20 million a year at defensive tackle. Ed Oliver might just lose his mind this year, and he's seeing his peers. He saw what Jeffrey Simmons got. He saw what Dexter Lawrence got. We know what Quinton Williams is going to get. Could he really just go bananas this year and have a ton of sacks? It wouldn't surprise me. And he played hurt last year, right? I mean, we forget he was hurt in week 1 and was never quite the player that we were excited for him to be after a strong finish to his 2022 campaign. So no votes. I'm also surprised that Matt Milano went all the way up to number 3. He was number 6 for me. That feels right. Of course, it's my ballot, so of course it feels right. But number 3, man, that's huge. Top 3 most important player on the Bills is Matt Milano. I think a lot of that had to do with the voting and how the voting, how the panel saw Von Miller and Trey White. There were some people that left Von Miller and Trey White off of their ballots. And so I think some of the discrepancies with a few of us having them high, I had those people. I had Miller 3 and Trey White 4. Some people didn't have him in there at all. And so I think that is something that led to Matt Milano, who everybody had about in the middle. You average it out together, I think that kind of bumped them up. But I certainly a player worthy of the list, but number 3 was not something I fully expected. Some general thoughts on the project here. I really like the mix of players that ultimately made the consensus list. So again, the consensus top 10, Josh Allen, Stefon Diggs, Matt Milano, Deion Dawkins, Greg Rousseau at 5, Von Miller 6, Trey White, Dalton Kincaid, Spencer Brown, Kyer Elam. Got a really nice balanced mix of players here. You got 8 draft picks. So 8 players that Brandon Beane drafted plus 2 that he didn't, one being Stefon Diggs, the other being Von Miller. So I like that the core foundation of the players that we perceive as the most important are players that were draft picks. That's good. I like the positional distribution here. You have your starting quarterback, you have a wide receiver, 2 offensive tackles, 2 defensive ends, 2 corners, a tight end, and a linebacker. And so you talk about the most important positions for you to get right for a football team. It's quarterback, offensive tackle, receiver on offense. It's edge and corner on defense, and the Bills are well represented in those areas. I like that there's a nice mix of young players and veterans. So you have only one player over 30 years old in Von Miller. The average age here is 26.7 years old, which I think is a pretty healthy number. You have your last 3 first-round picks in Kyer Elam, Gregory Rousseau, and Dalton Kincaid. And so I like how those players are generally perceived to get to this point, to be on this list. So I like that. A few more general thoughts. I think everyone's sleeping on Trey White. And I know that Trey White was still number 7, but this guy can be a big-time impact playmaker for this defense, and I thought he was a little low at number 7. I'm really encouraged that Greg Rousseau went from 10 in 2022 to 5, right? That signals a lot of belief in who he is as a player, his trajectory, right? It's not just my perception here. This is 11 people combined to do this. And there was a lot of love for Greg Rousseau, and that was something that really encouraged me in working through this project. And I'm also encouraged that Spencer Brown made the list. And he wasn't even on my ballot. But the fact that this panel collectively didn't completely dismiss the idea that, hey, he could be the guy at right tackle. And he's going to be this year, right? The Bills didn't do a single thing. They brought back David Quessenberry. That's it at tackle. They didn't draft anybody, didn't pay anybody in free agency. This is Spencer Brown's job. And so while we all recognize he's been inconsistent and needs to play better, the fact that this panel voted him in, and not even like the number 10 player. He was number 9. He was number 13 last year. Wasn't even in it last year. So I like that. That encourages me a lot. And then the last thing I'll say here is once again on Deion Dawkins. Deion Dawkins has been in the top 5 of our list each of the last 2 years. Like I said already, back-to-back Pro Bowls, entering his 7th season as the Bills left tackle. Dude's just been really, really steady, and a player that I really admire on this roster, which is really crazy to me because I get some like weird feedback on Deion Dawkins. Like, he's not universally loved. I don't get it. I don't get that at all. Like, I can see a lot of sides of things and understand different perspectives, but the fact that there's just like a random people that interact with me and say things about Deion Dawkins like that he's not that good or they're concerned about him. I don't get it. That's one that I just don't get. But the panel gets it. Got him at number 4 this year. Again, top 5 back-to-back years. All right, folks. That's it for today on the podcast. That's it for this series on the 10 most important players to the future of the Buffalo Bills. I hope that you've done your list. I've really appreciated those of you that have shared that with me. It's been really cool to see as many different ideas and thoughts as possible on this. So if you want to share yours, put it in the YouTube comments, share it on Twitter. All that stuff is really, really appreciated. Tomorrow we're planning on herd mentality. I know that we're a little bit late this week to get to it, so got a bunch of people to respond to and put that show together for tomorrow. Again, join the subtext community. Talked about the giveaway and all the perks for that earlier. Again, the link to join the subtext community is in the show notes for today. All right, folks. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.